Senior President, you're getting your cue. Hey.
Hi, this is Kate. I'm trying. Hi, who's this?
All right, I'll cut that video out. Go on.
With us today, and always, but she's presenting today, is Whitney Stone. She is with Minds & Associates talking about management consultation. So one of the things we like to do is we like to make sure that we're covering EAP topics both at sort of the clinical and individual level, and then at sort of the company management advisory and organizational development level, and Whitney's an expert in that. So there you go. I just set you right up.
Good.
Thank you.
Does everybody have these handouts on their tables? We're going to pass a couple more of these out. Okay. So I'm really excited to have such a diverse kind of group here with us today. We always do here at EAPA, but I know we've got a lot of folks here who work in mediation, conflict resolution, account management, plus those of us who are also private practice individual practitioners. So I think we can have a really good discussion today about this topic. Just to kind of go through what we're wanting to do today so that we can stay on track with the PDHs, right? Of course, we want to look at what is this? Management consultation. Is one of those terms that to me seems like it could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I'd really like us to focus in today on what it means in the employee assistance profession. And when we say, I had a management consultation today, what do we mean by that? And also to look at how do we do this? What is it that, what are the skills that we already have because of our jobs and backgrounds that help us to provide management consultations, and what are some skills that we in our own individual lives may want to develop further, and where can we do that? And then we want to take a look at the risks involved. Of course, in our profession, there's risk involved with pretty much everything we do, and this is certainly not an exception to that. So we want to talk about what are the risks potentially in providing this service, the risk to yourself with your own personal licensure, whatever that may be, the risks to your EAP organization or your EAP services, and also keeping an eye and an ear out for any risks to your client company. So that's a big part of providing this service as well. So that's kind of what we're going to take a look at today. Here is EAPA's definition of management consultation. That font is a little small, so I'll read it. But core technology from National EAPA, of course, is defining this as consultation, training, and assistance to work with organization leadership. So anywhere from a small business to a really large union and everything in between. The purpose is to manage a troubled employee, figure out issues within the work environment, improve employee job performance, which could mean anything from a level 1 person working in the kitchen up to another manager or a CEO, and then outreach about EAP services. So that's a really important thing to remember as we're talking about this topic today, is management consultation is a product, right? It's something that we provide from the EAP company perspective, and part of the reason we do that is to push the EAP services. We're all in this business because we know that EAP can reach individual employees and kind of build from there, and we can intervene on an individual level, and that can affect the larger system. So when we're doing management consultations, it helps to have that in the back of our head as far as making sure that we're intervening on every possible level that we can to help with the overall organization of any structural issues. EAP is a place where managers come to figure out human behavior, which may be perceived as random and unpredictable. No surprise to us. But I'm sure you guys know it's, it does feel like that's a surprise to a lot of managers by the time they get to us for a consultation. they're surprised at the way that people are interacting and reacting in the workplace. And if you're not an expert in human behavior, it can be pretty jarring, yeah? And it can cause managers to react in ways as well. So results of management consultation, certainly coordination of referral to EAP, so getting those individuals into the EAP program to get assistance and to get that done. Creation of action plans, suggestions of possible solutions, and the opportunity to provide trainings, workshops, those types of things. Okay, so great. Now what is this really? We're a group of professionals here. We can read the official definitions all day long, but I'd really like for us to have a conversation today about what we're doing as professionals down to that nitty-gritty aspect, and what does it feel like for us to do, and what are some of the things that we can improve on, some of the things that maybe share some ideas and tips and things that really work well for us in these situations, because it can be pretty unpredictable. We never know what's on the other end of that phone line. So looking at these, I just threw some ideas out here about what are we really doing. Take a look at that list, and I'd like to ask you all to add to it. So helping the manager manage, resources, support systems. We're wanting to locate strengths within the manager, him or herself, and within the organization too. What's already going well within this organization? What supports can we identify that might help us find a solution? Also looking at strengths that already exist in the manager's own skill set, which, you know, if you're a manager and you're having kind of employee conflict, or you're trying to handle that, your own emotions can become involved. And sometimes when that happens, we forget what we're good at. So it can be really helpful for a manager to hear from the consultant on, hey, this, you know, I've worked with you before, I know you do this really well. Or this is a place where you're thinking about this and it sounds right on to me, let's keep you going in that direction. We're establishing a plan, maintaining present focus, which again, when we bring that emotional side of things in, can be a little bit tricky. So we want to maintain that focus on the plan, on the facts of the situation, and rather than how everybody's feeling and he said, she said, and those types of issues. Yeah. Anything else, any other ideas of what we're doing here? What's needed when we're doing a consultation, Caitlin?
One thing I like to do when I was working in the EAP is a lot of times managers get promoted for their technical expertise, not necessarily for their ability to manage team dynamics or personalities or difficult personalities. So I think really reminding the manager or normalizing that it's okay, it's not like they went to school for this kind of stuff, you know, that's kind of what we did. And just validating that personalities and dynamics can get funky really fast, and complimenting them for being open to coming down and accessing their resources and figuring out how they can best manage the situation. I think goes a long way with a manager who doesn't want to feel like they're not doing a good job.
And I'll kind of repeat that for our people on the phone. Kaylin's just talking about, so oftentimes managers end up in a managerial position when they weren't necessarily looking for that in the first place. Certainly, you know, they agreed to be in that job, but they might not have a lot of executive training, coaching, a lot of experience really managing people in that capacity. So those, you know, so just validating that, you said, can be really helpful in bringing that manager back down to a place where he or she can focus on the facts and focus in on the issue at hand. Great. Randy, looking around this way.
Back to what you were saying earlier, Whitney, we're also, maybe not saying so, but we are reducing risk for that manager.
Great.
It really does, as you were saying, it's so hard. We get so many managers who are really bright, but they're smart enough to know if I can get one more person involved in this conversation who can see this through a different filter than I can.
Yes.
It's gonna be safer for me, and I'm gonna get a better result and all of that.
Yes, reducing risk for the manager, it's huge. And I love the way you put that too, is that's another place where we can really validate the person that's calling us for assistance, is you know enough to have another person in on this. Even if you think you're right, if you think you're far enough removed from the situation that you can see it clearly, it doesn't hurt to check in. And in fact, if you document that and you do that, it's, you know, CYA adage, right? To be real professional about it. But that's a great point, yeah. Patrick?
Well, this may be all those things, and Randy just mentioned it as a piece of what she said, but I think it's importantly offering a different perspective. Offering an alternative perspective, because we get so locked into seeing things a certain way.
Yeah, so, right, because we may be, if you're the manager, you may be emotionally involved. You may be a part of the problem. And we're all subject to not being able to see the forest for the trees when it comes to something like that. So just offering that different perspective and doing it in a way that feels validating, compassionate, and overall helpful. Reader?
I think a big one is supporting and reinforcing the role of the manager.
Okay.
A lot of times, particularly on critical incident, we come in and kind of take over. And what we really need to do is work through the manager, where he maintains his role as the leader of the group.
Yep. Right. Yeah. Helping that manager manage. I'm here to help you do your job. I'm not here to do it for you. It's a really good point. And you also bring up you said critical incident, which makes me think about what are we, I'm really liking this deeper thing here. What are we not doing? Down at the bottom there, we're not doing mediation, conflict resolution, executive training, critical incident support, and debriefing. That might be the result of a management consultation. Those things might be the end result or a recommendation or something like that. But that's not necessarily what we're doing. So we're not here to come in to take over or any of that. Other ideas about what we're not doing. I find sometimes that's the easier way to define something, is to think about what it's not.
Fixing the system.
Fixing the system. Can you say a little more about that?
Well, a lot of times people expect us to come in and fix the problem. And that's not our role. Their role is to fix the problem. We help them diagnose what the problem is and maybe give them resources. But that's their job, is to fix the problem if there is a problem.
So we're helping to see the problem, maybe give a bit of a different perspective, gather information about the problem, collaborate about it. But at the end of the day, fixing it is whose responsibility.
Now, I'm sure everybody in this room has been asked to do a 1-hour stress management for a company. And they expect that to fix the stress issue in the company or in that work group or whatever. And I think we need to not play into that we're going to come out and fix it by doing a 1-hour session on stress. Even if they do pay us.
Yeah. Right? So, and it can be, I don't know, I'm interested to hear about that piece in particular. It can be really easy to jump to a solution like that. You're calling me, I know how to do a training on stress management. We're done here. I'll be in on Tuesday. Has anybody ever been in a situation where you remember feeling that urge to maybe jump to a solution? I know I have.
Oh, yeah.
Anger management all the time.
Okay.
It's already pre-diagnosed for you. This guy needs anger management.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Farms do.
Yeah.
Nobody has the expertise to actually assess it, but it is.
Anger management.
And they want you to provide your training
Yeah.
for that
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
so that they don't have to identify it. And that person might be sick then.
But we all get trained.
Okay, and in the back?
Well, and another thing that I've found over the management consultation I've done, that I have a tendency to, I can notice inside, I'm aware of happening inside, because the manager's a mess. And you're clearly going to the place of, well, so how can I support this manager? It's not about therapizing the manager. It's not about counseling the manager. It's about setting a good, clear boundary about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, as opposed to the manager going, please help me, help me, help me. You know, so,
Yeah.
yes, I'll help, but we're not going to do counseling here. Let me sign you up for EAP sessions yourself.
I love it. It's such a fine line, isn't it? And that's why this is one of my favorite parts of my job. As complex and frustrating as it is sometimes, it reminds me of like one of those really long algebra problems from high school, where you step back and look at this thing and it is just a big old mess and there's no way I'm going to be able to figure this out. But you get a little closer and you take a deep breath, and you know what, if I just focus on the part within the parentheses first and solve that little mini problem, the overall thing starts to get a little more manageable. So if we can help a manager to look at it in that way, that can be really, really helpful. And that means we have to look at it like that too. Randy?
We had a recent case that was one of those, it was so there were so many layers, we were, you know, starting to call it the onion case. We just could not believe the complexity. But one of the things that came out of it is just a discussion, me and a couple of other people, about don't ever let yourself be pulled into anything that even resembles an investigation or truth gathering or being, you know, somebody's private investigator.
Yes.
You know, I'm way up here at the top of the organization, and I'm so glad we have an EAP. Here's what I want you to do, because I'm going to get to the bottom of this no matter what. Right? It's wrong. That's not our role. And even though I think we all know enough to say that, it was tough, because it was still his understanding that that's what we were doing, no matter what we said.
Yeah. And that's not an uncommon situation, and it is. That's a huge skill, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, actually. You know, it's part of our job. One of the bigger parts of this job for us is to know what our role is and what it's not. This is really different from counseling, although a lot of our counseling skills will come into play. And we're not doing investigating. We're not taking sides. We're not here to align with anybody or promise any outcome. It's really just a 10,000-foot view of the issue and assisting somebody in, well, here are some options that you already know about. Here are some options you may not have thought about. There's your decision. At the end of this process, the manager needs to be the one who gets credit for solving the problem, not us. Yeah, they need to look good to their boss and their organization, and they'll sit back and know we did our best. So good. And that kind of is a great transition to the next part of this. So just questions that I had, and we might have some different ones. So, all employee assistance professionals, counselors, account managers, anybody who works in the EA field. Can we all do this? Head shaking, why not?
I don't think all of us have the skills to do that. I think that's something that you have to learn.
So it's a skill, it's a specific skill set that really needs to be developed.
It's a different role than sitting in a counseling session.
Okay, so if you work with, if you're a private practitioner, say, that sees people through for an employee assistance program, and you're really just doing that individual, family, the counseling side of things, maybe this would be a skill set that is not something that's quite developed yet.
It's kind of like asking a trial lawyer to do mediation. Because they're taught to win, the mediators are taught to win-win. Not exactly the same comparison, but it's really shifting that kind of thinking. It's really hard to.
Yeah, okay.
You're used to counseling people and then walking in and doing what you had on the last slide is very different.
It is, yeah, that's a good point. So repeating for the phone, it's like asking a trial lawyer to do a mediation. Yeah, it's a really different way of thinking. Instead of we want one person to come out of this we have to think we want everybody to come out of this better, and the organization to come out of this better. Okay, so we're talking about not everybody might have this skill set, so what is this skill set? What are the particular things outside of empathic listening and validation, and what else do we need in order to do this service and do it appropriately?
I think you need to know what your role is. Like, I mean, we wear different hats in EAP, and I think being really clear on what your purpose is at that point in time.
Okay, so knowing that role and the boundaries.
Which clinical skills aren't necessarily the same, as they don't necessarily encourage systematic thinking all the time. But you have to be able to think in terms of the organization, the work group, and the person that, you know, is who I'm guessing we're talking about.
Systematic thinking. So you're saying that one group counseling class in grad school does not a management consultation make?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go back to Deb and we'll come
I
back.
think it depends on which agency or organization you work for, whether it's, you know, the city and county or public schools, they do it all different. So even though you may use similar skill sets, I think you have to know what you are able to do and not do, and it's different with each agency, and that's what you have to learn.
Culture.
Yep.
Culture. So not just knowing the boundaries of the consultant role in general, but being highly aware of our own boundaries, of our organization's role and boundaries, what we're, you know, maybe more competent at, and where our own expertise lies. Yeah. Terry, did you have something else?
Yeah, I think the person really needs to have a background in all the things that you have on your handout, and understanding of some legal issues that they might encounter, even though they're certainly not acting in a legal capacity.
Yeah, so great time to check out those handouts if you haven't already. We need to have an overall understanding and just the ability to speak some of the same language as somebody that is in a high-level business role. So that does mean an understanding of what some HR policies are, what do some of these acronyms mean. Easy to think that we automatically need to be an expert in all of that, but we'll talk about that too a little bit later. But even just being familiar, I think familiarity with those things is really important.
Can I say?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
I think when you're consulting with an organization and there's a lot of different players involved, you have to realize that all those people are your customers. And when you're seeing an individual, it's just that person who's your customer. And I think if you have a manager coming to you, you can't just necessarily treat them as their customer. If you're giving them feedback or information on stuff with HR, that's HR related, they go to HR, and for all the people off of HR, you know, just, generally more than just one person.
Great.
Well, and dovetailing on that, making sure that when you get that first management consultant call, have you talked to your legal department? Have you talked to HR? Have you, so reminding that manager, for risk purposes, have you talked to legal about this person who's an IT genius and who might crash your system? I mean, have you brought in all of your department too? So that's a really good point there.
That is a good point. I know that we've had, I had an organization manager say to me once, gosh, we just call you guys first when things go up. Okay. Yeah, I'm really glad you do. Now, who else do you need to call? Also, who else do we need to bring in on this conversation? I saw a couple other hands.
About 3 or 4 years ago, I started, whenever I was going to do work with the company, I'd Google it and read articles about them, nationally, internationally, or locally, and find out what was going on in the company. Because if you can walk in there and when they start talking about something happening, you say, yeah, I'm kind of familiar with that. It gives you a lot of credibility really quick.
Okay, yeah. So just in addition to generally familiarizing ourselves with HR policies and workplace law, things like that, being as familiar as we can with the company, maybe if it's a company that we don't already work with.
And also, whoever asks you to come in, interview them rather than them interviewing you, do both. But find out what's going on in the company. Why did they ask you in? Are they going through a downsizing? Did they just change the manager? Are they closing the place down? what else is going on that's gonna impact when you come in and speak to a group of 50 people, and they all have their battle armor on, and you weren't aware of that.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? How might this service, management consult in particular, how does this look or feel different? Maybe those of us who have worked in an external EAP system versus an internal EAP. I know what it's like from an external, for sure. But anybody here have experience doing this from the internal side? Maybe a little bit, Randy?
Yeah, I'm trying to think what I think one of the challenges is there's an assumption, higher leadership. So for me, state government, it's big. So there's not just one person up there. It's multiple companies, kind of, you can call it that. But there's an assumption, if you're an internal EAP, then you work for me. And because you work for me, you better do what I want you to do, right? And so there is some skill involved with establishing that that's absolutely not true.
Okay.
And you may be my client amongst others, but I don't report to you, and I will do, I will give you whatever advice I have or direction I have or support I have, but, I'm not going to be evaluated by you, and I'm not going to do things to make you happy.
Okay. Yeah, so there could be a perception from the internal side a perception of the EAP consultant as an ally to the manager. Patrick?
I think there's the exact same pros and cons to both. So in an internal, you're connected to the organization, you understand the organization,
already have that
you're part of the
background.
organization. As an external, you're not part of the organization, you're not part of it. So that's the same pro and con, there's advantages to both.
Yeah, and I think with external too, there can be kind of the opposite thing going on. Is there can be a perception with an external EAP that this is highly confidential, and there's more of that aspect of it. Where with an internal system, there might be the expectation that you can share all this information that you really can't. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that casual differentiation is very important, because the internal will be seen as a lot more casual and less formal than the external. Then you have to be really clear about that as an internal.
So from an internal perspective, you need to be even more aware, because you might walk past 5 people who are involved in this conflict on your lunch hour, on your way out the door at the end of the day. So, so the consultant really needs to be hyper aware and be managing those boundaries at a time when the boundary work might be difficult for some of the parties involved. And also modeling the boundaries and the appropriate communication and all of that, yeah. So a lot of this we're already talking about. But some of the more, even drilling down a little bit further on the specific skills, asking good questions, listening, a lot of our counseling skills will come in. But assessing the need, keeping in mind what does the problem employee need, what does the manager need, what does the organization need. Remembering that our client is really a larger organization, even though we may feel pulled and asked to help one person or fix one person. Broken record, that's my term, which means just coming back and back and back to the point, to what do we need to see at the end of this? Because it's really easy to get off track. It's really easy for people to get emotional, to focus on things that, well, I remember 3 years ago they did this too, and let me tell you about that. And we need to really be able to know where's the line? How long do we let that go? How much of that is really helpful? So broken record just means repeating. Okay, so how does that bring us to what we need to see at the end of this? And a safety focus, we haven't really touched on that yet. What do I mean? What do you think I mean when I say we need to be focused on safety? Where does safety come in with this? Somebody's just angry at work.
maybe has tested positive for drugs or alcohol, and is working in a safety-sensitive position, there's a risk to the workplace.
So keeping that risk in mind again. And this might be a good place, I don't necessarily have a slide about this, but can we just throw out, why do management consultations happen? What happens in the workplace that leads a manager to call for this? A positive drug screen? Conflict?
Disruptive behaviors in the workplace.
Disruptive behaviors, such as?
Well, some behaviors that might be performance related, or they might lead you to think that there might be a fitness for duty required evaluation for the employee.
Okay.
The risk management piece that Randy was just nodding her head about too, you know, when you've got somebody who's angry in the workplace, okay, do you have a risk management team in your particular agency, your particular group? If you do, let's call them in so we can also do, one of the cases I'm working in now, they have the whole kit and caboodle. They've got the dean of the university, they've got the risk management team, they've got the provost, they've got everything on board, because this person is an IT specialist and he does have the skill sets to really cause havoc if he wants to, and he's very angry. So let's pull it all together and see what we need to do about putting boundaries on this.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Other reasons that we've seen these come through.
Performance issues and performance problems or sudden changes in their behavior or interactions, such.
So the work's not getting done, or it's not getting done up to the standard that it was. Maybe that's a sudden change. And I really love to go back to Kaylin, your point about validating a manager. How great that you noticed that. And how great that you're willing to work with this person and bring us in and have an hour or so of your day spent on trying to help here and make this better.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I also think one of the reasons that people call us is they feel compassion. They genuinely care about employees that are reporting to them or in their organization, and when they see them distressed and they don't know what to do to help them, or how do we get them to the EAP, how do we approach them, what does it mean when somebody's under their desk crying, am I supposed to do something, or is that a violation of their privacy, you know, that kind of thing. So it can be, it's not always about negative problems, it can be about some sad.
Well, and I like what you're saying there too, is bringing that back to there's a lot of positive that is already happening in some of these problems. A manager is wanting to help, somebody's feeling compassion for somebody else. A work group is rallying around one of their coworkers who's under distress, or a work group wants to support each other when something difficult is going on, like a round of layoffs. So there's a lot of positive stuff that we, as a consultant, can shine a bit of a light on when that might not be what people are currently focused on, which can really help to calm something down. Judy, you had something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so often what I would hear is, we feel like we've tried all these different things and none of them have worked. And so, like, now what do we do? So it's good then for them to tell you what they actually have tried, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and then to brainstorm in terms of where do we go from here. Because I would get that even from OD teams, when we would do some of those OD teams, even they would say that they had tried.
We've tried everything.
Yeah, they've tried everything and they still don't feel like they're making any progress. It's like pushing that boulder uphill, and where do we go from here? And then the other thing is that they want it fixed with a 1-hour workshop,
Right.
when it's an actual OD intervention.
Yeah, it may take, right, it didn't take us 1 hour to get to this point, so it may not take us 1 hour to get out of it. Right. Brian?
I think a lot of times, you know, when we focus on safety, it's about physical safety in the workplace, but what I'm hearing everybody say is there's so much about emotional safety in the workplace. That if you do what Judy's talking about, the emotional unsafeness of the workplace comes out. And that's something is it emotionally safe to be here for what's going on? What is the problem?
Okay, okay. Yeah, and that pulls into the, some of the tasks on here, just the harassment or the workplace, the way that it feels to work and the culture of an organization. That can start to feel unsafe for people too. And I think a lot of managers, maybe especially new managers, are really getting trained on the physical safety aspect and making sure that that's happening, and we can let the rest of it fly under the radar. Okay, Lynn, did you have a comment?
Well, I'd just like to reiterate with managers too, the importance of addressing this stuff, because the effect that it has on the group as a whole, and if the whole group is seeing that as a manager, you're not doing anything about this, then you create more crazy dynamics, and, you know, just, I know that sometimes we create our own monsters when we don't do anything about a situation.
So a good question to ask is not just what have you already tried, what has worked, what hasn't worked, you know, but what happens if you don't do anything here? What happens if you let this person cry under their desk and just let them work it out?
To it creating an unsafe environment, not just for that person, but for everybody else too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so risk analysis, the skill, what does risk analysis mean? And teaching people how to do that for themselves is really
Teaching
powerful.
the skill of risk analysis. Yes, yes. And what if we aren't the right person to teach that skill?
Somebody who is.
Like, does your organization have a risk management team? Or let's think about what resources do we have as your EAP on how we can help that skill be built instead of me making something up. Pat?
Just to get back to the safety issue, everybody knows I'm a therapist, but it took me many, many years to realize bottom line for anybody you see in business, therapy, is feeling safe. That's the bottom line. You don't think anything else but feeling safe. It's just, that's, after all these years, I figured out.
Which in an organization could mean absence of fear.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Being fired, being let go, fired, downsized.
Yes, absolutely. Because the productiveness comes from feeling safe. Yeah, basic need.
Okay, so productiveness comes from feeling safe. Safe is another word that can have, you ask 10 people what that means, you're gonna get 10 answers. So it's also it's a good thing to know, what does safe mean to your manager that you're working with? What does safe mean maybe to the employees who are involved in this? And where can we improve on that? I'm gonna do a little bit of a 180 here. Thinking about what this feels like really.
That's good.
Thanks to my marketing department for the graphic. But just, you know, we're all professionals. We've been in this situation, and it's great that we can feel confident and act confidently when we're doing this service. But I don't think, I mean, I think I'd be remiss to gloss over this point is, who are we talking to? These can be really high-level people. These are people who sign our contracts, and you know, these are people who pay us. They can fire us just as easily. So we can really feel that pressure to provide a good outcome, to promise that we can fix this, to jump to a 1-hour training that is going to solve the world peace issue. And that's not, you know, that's just not always a possibility. And I'm coming back to the EAPA kind of definition here. EAP is a place where managers have to figure out human behavior. And we are experts on human behavior. So if we're here to let the manager do what they do best, we've also got to be okay allowing ourselves to do what we do best. And letting that meet in the middle and letting that good stuff happen when that meets in the middle. We can really dig ourselves into a rut when we're pretending we know more about certain things than we do. And I mean, I had one come through yesterday. The universe gave me a lot of management consults this week in preparation. but asking me about the specific difference between a urine drug screen and a blood drug screen, and I was really, really glad about the last month's EAPA presentation. But it's a place where it's comfortable, it's me being comfortable saying, you know what, I don't know that I have the exact answer you're looking for there, but let's see where we can find that. Can be as simple as so what happens when we do fall into this trap of over-promising, of feeling the pressure? What are the risks to us, to them, when that happens?
I think one thing you have to do is you can never walk in a room, I don't care who it is, walk in a room feeling like you're a mouse and they're the elephant. You gotta walk in there acting confident and coming across as confident, or you have no credibility. And I'll put that back to anybody here that does management consultation. You can't go in there acting like you don't know anything, or, you know, gosh, gee whiz, why'd you call me in? You know, that kind of approach. And you have to be able to say to that person after you've done all your assessments, are you willing to make a commitment to what you're asking me to do? And if they say they are, then go with it. If they say, well, I don't know if we can do that, I don't think you take the consultation. I don't think you take the assignment, because you're setting yourself up for failure.
So, go ahead.
No, sorry. I like the allegory here, because if cartoons taught me anything, it's that elephants are afraid of mice. And maybe the mouse is like human behavior. It's this thing that they're used to sort of being able to manage, you know, people and how they operate, but they don't understand this. And this is why they're coming to us, because they don't get it, and they want somebody who does get it to whatever extent they do.
Yeah, I like that. It is. This is a small, not small. It's a piece of the overall management puzzle. It's a piece of the organizational puzzle, right? Interpersonal interactions, emotion. But in this moment, it feels huge. It feels like the only thing, because it's the one thing maybe that they don't feel like they can solve. So that's why they're coming to us. And it's, if we can just kind of sit back and know that I know this, and I trust myself and have that confidence, without being overconfident and knowing where our own limits are, it's a good thing.
Well, I think taking the time, like you're just saying, to gather all the information, so you don't necessarily have to have a resolution or these are our next steps right in that moment. You can take all it in if you need to do a little research and get back to them right away to be able to do that, so you can give them something and gather as much as you can on the phone, but then get back to them if it's something more complicated or something that you don't have as much experience in.
So you're saying that a potential solve to this problem for us is to give ourselves time and give ourselves space. Start with gathering factual information, start with all of that, and then step back, and let yourself do that process. Exactly.
I had a friend back in Texas years ago who was a therapist and was asked by a company to do a stress management. And she said, I'd never done it before, but she said, I gathered all the information about what they wanted, and I spent the whole weekend at the library researching stress management and did the training the next week. So she became an expert over the weekend. But she didn't say, I know anything, she just listened the whole time. And it came across pretty well.
So potential risks here, I think we're touching on a lot of them. But certainly this can lead to that whole list of what we are not supposed to be doing here, right? That whole list of don'ts. We can end up over-promising. We can end up aligning with the manager. We can end up counseling because we really want to be perceived as helpful right now. Overlooking the manager's contributions to the problem. Just saying, you know what, let me just tie your shoe for you. Right? Has anybody ever sat by while a 3-year-old tries to tie their shoe? Can we just do it for you? We can get there on time. But certainly, because we're not emotionally involved in this situation, we may be able to see it pretty clearly. But that's not going to help the organization in the long run if we just come in and swoop in and fix this. They're going to call us again next week with a very similar problem. So giving space and time and allowing that process to happen is something we can skip if we fall prey to this factor. That may be a good time for a break, which we're there anyway.
You got it as fast. Okay, good.
Okay, so let's kind of, I realized that I meant to break after the next slide, so we're going to pick up right where we left off. But talking about this intimidation factor leads us into this place of risk. So continuing to really think about, what can happen maybe when we fall prey to that intimidation factor, and really getting more into this idea of what's the real danger there. It's more than just an oops situation, or let me try that again. It can present a danger. So some of the things that may be more unhelpful that we might feel pushed to do are some of the things, we've touched on some of them already, but so prescribing a solution. Oh, well, this is what you need to do, and this is where you need to get it, and this is when you need to do it, and this is how. So if that fails, or if it doesn't give the outcome, or if it has a worse outcome, whose fault is that if it was our official prescription recommendation? Increasing conflict. How can a management consultation increase conflict? By taking sides? Yeah? Can you say more about that? Taking sides with?
Well, there's some people in conflict, or two ideas in conflict, and you're working with those two people. If you begin to believe inside that one person's right, that's, even just the belief will come through even further.
Okay, yeah, so if we have an alignment with one side or the other, and we voice that alignment, sometimes we have it, right? But if we give voice to that alignment, it could kind of fuel the fire of that conflict instead of focusing on compassion, solution finding. What about the idea of increasing conflict between the EAP and the manager, or the EAP and the organization? How might that conflict look or come about?
I think if they don't like what you're telling them.
Okay.
You've all heard me talk about, we had the small engineering company, and we found that one of the very high-level VPs was sexually harassing the women in the group, and they had a lot of people leaving. And we empowered the HR person to go to the president to talk about these issues. Well, when it came back, they fired us. And that was the only time I can ever remember being fired for an issue like that. And we didn't break confidentiality or anything, but we let them know about the liability issues that they had. And they chose to keep this VP and fire us.
Okay. And I guess that in certain instances, that type of outcome can be unavoidable.
Right.
If the EAP ends up having to take the fall. Randy?
Well, the one I love the most is, I know you said that part would be confidential, but we need to know a little more than you're telling us. Sorry, I can't give you a little more than I have already. That's it. That's what I told you I would give you in the first place. That's all. And, well, who do you report to? Well, let me give you the names, because it's perfectly okay with me if you need or want to stir the pot and, try to intimidate me into disclosing something that I'm not willing to. I think it, professionally, personally, I feel good in those roles. But it's not fun in the context of being at work and having to deal with all of it.
No.
I feel good about what I'm doing, but I don't like it, but it comes up.
Yeah, and it sounds like that has come up for everybody. Yeah, and that is disclosing protected information, even just eking over the line of what your release of information or whatever documentation you have just pushing over that line a little bit of what you're allowed to disclose can be a really dangerous spot. And where we all have to take a look at our own professional ethics and our ethics that we're bound by through EAPA as well. Is it an ethical breach or a privacy breach if I, don't include the person's name, but I throw a theoretical situation out there? We're always having to think about that. So that can be a dangerous spot. And it's a skill that needs to be developed, of being okay with that. Yeah, I know you might not like this, and yes, you may call my supervisor. And that's not gonna change the outcome. Writing and interpreting workplace policies. We talked some about this if you were at last month's meeting, specifically with drug-free workplace policies. We might not be the people to write those, or managers reading us their policy and saying, what does this mean? How does this situation fit into this? That's not a place where we want to necessarily get into, well, you need to change this, that, and the other thing about your policy. Where can a manager go, though, if they're wanting to know more about their policies, help with changing their policies in their organization? Where does that come from?
HR, legal, your attorney.
HR, legal, attorney. What about a real small company or a restaurant or a place that doesn't have HR or legal?
The owner.
The owner. What if you're talking to the owner and they're asking us?
That's a problem.
It's happened. Patrick?
I think we advertise that we consult about policy development, so we will advise about that. And that's not really a management consult, that's more of a account management function in our organization. But I think we would stop short of writing the policy. So they're gonna have to go to somebody, an HR consultant, to write
Well,
that themselves. But
yeah, and I think that's...
we advise about it, I think, all
Yeah,
the time.
we'll advise about it. And that's a good point too, is that would be a place where maybe your role would switch. But you have to have that upfront agreement with, I think that this situation, it sounds like you might benefit from some advisement around these policies. We can do that service, or this person in our EAP can do that service. What do you think about setting that up? So keeping that as a separate thing and knowing what is and isn't involved in the consult process.
I think we're always really clear, you need to have a legal review. So even if we're going to consult or provide resources or information, once this is done, it's your responsibility to get this reviewed by legal and have them sign off on this policy or, yeah.
So just in the way that we're advising our managers to always bring in as many people as are needed, we can do that too.
I also think it's a danger zone if you don't know what their policy is. Because, there's about 1 million policies in government. I couldn't even begin. So what is your policy? Well, I don't know. I guess we might have one. Well, tell you what, find it and then call me back.
Yeah.
If we don't know what your policy says, it will be difficult for you to know what your parameters are and your options are and all of that.
Right, yep, so just putting that responsibility back and allowing, and that's allowing the manager to build his or her own skills and expertise too. That's it's a really good way of coaching them to understand, because this will happen again at some point, so you now know this information.
Well, I think along those lines, if the manager doesn't know what those policies are, your staff know what those policies are, could this be a good educational opportunity for the organization?
Yes, absolutely. That's a good point. If the manager doesn't know these policies, probably not a good chance that a whole lot of other people do either. So it's a great education opportunity, and that's a good example of seeing that 10,000-foot view of the whole situation and how this moment right now, even though we're helping the manager stay focused in the present moment, we're thinking down the road. How is this going to affect your company moving forward? How can we have the best outcome for the future of your company and the future of our relationship with your company? Yeah.
It's always a good policy to ask them to provide you with their policies when you start a contract. They should always be in your file so that you can review them when you get a call.
Great. Yeah. Always a good idea to have their policies on file at the start of the relationship. And and set a reminder to ask for updates, which may or may not ever be provided. What about the other side of this? When do you make a hard recommendation? When do you prescribe an action in a consultation?
Safety, if there's a safety
Issues of
concern.
safety. I think that's, yeah, definitely that's the obvious answer. If there's a professional who's impaired and in a safety sensitive position, we're gonna say, you know, you really wanna think hard about removing this person from the job for right now. And that is, you know, I feel comfortable saying, you probably need to do that.
Or if there's
When
a
there's-
violation also of their policies, because you open up a real Pandora's box if you don't follow your own policies and you don't fire or terminate someone, and then you've now opened a Pandora's box for the next person that runs into that situation, and they can say, well, you allowed so-and-so.
Setting
You made an
precedent.
exception, you set precedents.
Patrick?
When there's a clear risk and you're aware of that risk, so the areas of harassment, ADA, hiring practices, you know, asking people's age, I mean, you may say you can't do that, right? You
Yeah.
can't do that in an interview.
Right, if we know enough about workplace law and policy, you know, we can say, that sounds like you're getting into a really sticky position here, and you probably want to think 2 or 3 or 4 times about that. Chris?
It might go without saying, but anytime you would have broken confidentiality in clinical practice, if you're finding out things that are along the same sort of lines, where there's risk of harm to yourself or others, et cetera.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And to add to what Chris just said, even if you don't know, when we get situations where, well, this person could be very dangerous, but then again, maybe not. And if there's a possibility of it, to share that conversation with the decision makers, which often leads to, let's at least get them out of the workplace for now until we decide.
Until we
what
get a better
the best
handle.
thing to do.
Yep, yeah. And that's another example of buying time. If there is a chance that there's a safety issue here, let's just err on the side of wait and see. Wait until we can get this person assessed. Wait until we can get law enforcement involved if need be, and really know what we're looking at. Pat?
Just coming from the other side here, how do you know when there is a safety issue? I mean, the people who are gonna do what they're gonna do, they hide it.
Sometimes.
No? Then how do you
Most
know?
of the time, they show themselves just enough so
Just,
that.
you mean their personality, they get out of control, some kind of thing?
No,
People do evacuate.
Sitting in the cafeterias, you know, and take everybody out this afternoon with my sitting on automatic ride.
Well, I know, but
Red
I'm saying,
flag.
you wanna know before, and I'm saying, how do you know before?
Because usually someone will come and tell, who've heard that person say that, they'll report it to the
Okay,
manager
that's,
or HR.
that's,
And then manager contacts us and says, I've got a threat of violence.
okay. Somebody
There's no
hears,
crystal
somebody
ball.
else hears something.
I think that's what the schools run into all the time. I mean, they do their very best to be alert and to look for situations, but I mean, how many times have we had issues with the schools that there were so kinds of things going on that people didn't pay attention to? And I think and all your policies have changed regarding that since we've had those incidents.
Well, they have that safe to tell line now too, so kids are using that there, it's increased tremendously, so kids will call anonymously and report things, but not always, like that terrible situation with the student that set himself on fire. Some of the kids had heard him talking about it on the weekend, and then they kind of dismissed it, or didn't think it was, didn't think it would really happen.
Those models are interesting from our standpoint, though, because what schools do with a student who, you know, another student sees them talk about something or overhears something, that tells them what, there's a threat assessment process that is engaged in with district personnel, various sorts of areas of expertise, and that's sort of maybe what we're sort of talking about here, is that we're one of those sort of areas of expertise in that consulting process, as is the manager, as is someone from HR, as is, maybe an outside assessor or something like that.
But if you're looking at people who are personality disordered or people who are sociopaths, you can't tell. And neither can their friends. I mean, they have like a wonderful persona. So that's why I was just kind of asking, how do you find out? But I'm hearing that you do have ways.
I'll tell you about how we found out the most recent one. Was the social media, I guess you call it these days. But it was somebody saw something on Facebook, called the manager read Facebook. This was Facebook on personal time, by the way, right? Somebody called us, what do we do with this?
Yes.
And we had to say, you can't ignore this. You cannot ignore this. And are you butting your noses into that person's private life? Yep.
I mean, that's a great example, though, of when we're going to take that hard line. You have to do something here.
Right.
And social media and the internet has been a huge blessing in bleeding the line between personal and professional boundaries, hasn't it? But it happens all the time.
I'd be curious about other organizations' view on this, and maybe even within our own organization, but I'm always very careful to present management consultation as something that's private, but not confidential. And there's a distinction between those two. So if I do a management consultation, I may end up talking to HR, and I'm not going to ask for a release of information from that manager to talk about that. So there's a difference between privacy and confidentiality, and I would never present it as something that's confidential. Would that be consistent with other? Randy?
Let's talk about it.
Well, going to what Patrick says, are you getting asked by a manager to come in and do a consultation on a work team that's not functioning right? He's giving you permission to talk to anybody in that work team, and it's not confidential. Now, you might be careful about going back and saying so-and-so said so, but I've always come back and said, this is what I've learned from talking to everyone. These are the points that I've learned. And it was like private. You're not going to talk to other work groups about it, but you're going to talk within the confines of the group that's been defined as your population.
I mean, private means that I'm not going to go out of my way to report about a management consultation that I did to the organization.
Right.
But I may well say to that person, you need to talk to HR about this issue, and then HR is going to loop back the manager and myself about an intervention. And there's not an implied confidentiality or a release of information on the case. Whereas if it's a clinical consultation, right, you are not going to release that without a release of information. That's a different standard in my view.
I always ask them, did you talk to HR, because the people that get pissed off the most are HR when they find out that you're working with groups and they haven't know anything about it.
The toughest one is when they say, no, I don't trust HR.
Well,
And that
that's
happens
every group.
regularly. Not every group, Raider. There are a cynical few.
9 out of 10.
One or two
Okay, 9 out
have
of
a
10.
good working relationship.
Well, so Patrick, I think what I'm hearing you say is, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, we're not providing psychotherapy here.
Right.
So does that mean that, the privacy laws related to counseling and therapy, does it mean that they don't apply? What's the difference between this is a private conversation versus a legally confidential conversation?
It's certainly not regulated by HIPAA, right? It's not health information. It's organizational information. It's really different.
And you're taking off your EAP hat if you're doing like Randy does. You're taking off that EAP hat and putting on the consultation hat. It's a different role.
What are
Okay,
your
but I'm
thoughts?
gonna stick my neck out here,
Good.
because this is something that we struggle with, at CSAP. And I'd say we'll always be struggling until you all tell me what to do. There are too many times when, we've reached the conclusion that we, as much as we'd like to share some piece of a consultation, we are never gonna do it. So I started putting out questions, and I ended up on the phone with EAP in Washington, and they said, we agree, we treat it like it's confidential,
Oh,
even
wow.
though it's not legally, we don't give them a disclosure or anything like that, we still tell them it's confidential. I said, well, how do you do that, and they said, well, we actually were giving them something in writing, saying it was confidential, but then it was like they were signing them, and it was a disaster, because most of them were on the phone, and, it was a mess. So, they now do it verbally, and I don't remember whether they record that or what they do, but what we do now is on every consultation in the database, we have a little tiny thing at the bottom that says reviewed confidentiality on the following date. We put the date in and that's it. And we do it. We say, this is confidential, you are not my counseling client, but it's important to us that you know that we're not going to share anything about this conversation. And then at the same time, with consultation, it is, I need you to clearly hear me say that I think you need to talk to HR and you need to do this. And at least from my point of view, I would strongly encourage you to do those things. And if they don't, then is it a safety concern, and is it something I need to share with somebody because it's a safety concern? Otherwise, we don't. We just don't.
So how, so if they then share with HR, and you just do that conversation, that with the original person that you had the conversation, so it's still confidential, or would you then do, how do you maneuver?
We get back to the original person and say we've heard from HR and they'd like to talk with me about this. You know, I just wanted to make sure that was okay with you. Even better, could we have a three-way conversation? Then we feel even better about that.
So you're using
it's tough.
Yeah, it is really tough. We're kind of doing our own management consultation here today.
I wonder if one of the guidelines might be sort of like a.
You do it that way, and then do you get people not responding?
So
in other words, you said we call them and say, you're going to talk to HR about this, we really like you in on this. Is that okay with you? And you say no? Or do they always say yes?
Respect that. They usually say yes.
Okay.
But Randy, if you end up having that three-way conversation then with the employee and HR, how do you manage that? Because that conversation with HR is not confidential. Not with you mean with the manager and HR? Yeah. If you're involved and HR is involved, then that cannot be confidential. Then it's the old HIPAA thing about once somebody else knows something, you have no control over what they do. So the HR person has to abide by their own rules and ethics and all that stuff.
It sounds like a matter of over-communicating, which is something I think is a great skill for us to have in the consultation role anyway, is over-communicating with the person we're working with, asking their permission, because what we're doing there is really modeling appropriate communication channels. And yeah, it's really scary to have this conversation with HR, and maybe you don't trust HR. Let me be here to support that and start that relationship, hopefully getting a little bit better. And always, always we are to be documenting everything we say and do. Brian had his hand up and then I'll come over here.
So a couple things about this, and we navigate this, and Rader's comment about switching hats. We do this with the EAP and shop stewards. We have people in small stations that are both, so we talk to them a lot about it. You have to be very clear what role you're playing with this person, because they're very different roles. And we spend a lot of time really helping them differentiate. It occurs to me that if you're going to be confidential, the important thing is you identify that to them maybe once or twice or several times, or if you're not, to say, this is a management consultation, because the implication is I'm EAP, I'm confidential no matter what. Except now when I play as management consultant, I'm not. And you say that to them maybe 2 or 3 times, so they are aware and get them to acknowledge, yes, I understand this is confidential, and go from there. But once you start that triangulation, I mean, we get people to HR and we don't play a role in that purposely. We say, you know what, we'll encourage you to go to HR, and this is why we're encouraging you to go there. And we'll also coach you through that, but we won't sit in there with you. So be careful what you say, and give them only the information they really need, but be prepared for them to ask for a lot more.
Managers are often scared out of their wits. That's what we find. I'd say half of the consultations that we do, the person on the phone is really afraid of being discovered. That they've talked to us, they're intimidated by the people above them. It's important to them that we're not going to repeat what they said. So, well, if anybody has any, like, we shouldn't be doing this, I'd sure like to know.
Well, it sounds like you got some clarification from EAPA, which is interesting to me. I was just thinking that maybe the guideline for all of us, and then we have to take this in our own ways, you know, what's professionally in the best, so we have to make a professional judgment of what's in the best interest of that person.
Yeah.
As I understand it, that's kind of a general guideline around being subpoenaed in court. If you're subpoenaed, if you can violate confidentiality, you make a professional assessment that that's in the interest of the person at hand. And that's a tough judgment. We don't know that, but to me, I think we should all be doing that if we're ever going to, you know, share that privacy, that we know that it's really the best interest of all concerned. We've made that professional judgment, just at least as a guideline. But it sounds like the disclosure, what you're saying, is the important piece. And because you have this large, bureaucratic, very striated organization, it sounds like you've had to really err on the side of more privacy for people to use it, for it to be useful.
I think from a consultant standpoint, and I understand confidentiality, believe me, I do, but at the same time, most of the situations that we get involved in the workplace have fear involved, right? You just said the word, they're scared. Yeah. And what keeps fear alive in an organization? Secrecy. So if we get into an organization and see that what's happening is being fed by secrecy, we're doing a disservice to not bring that to light. And the reason why you're having this problem is you've got a lot of secrecy because people are afraid of getting fired, or afraid of retribution, or whatever else. And there's got to be some way to get that out. Maintaining confidentiality, but you've got to get that out to the decision makers so that something can be done. Otherwise, you're wasting your time and their money.
So it sounds almost like the job we're really focusing in on here is, if this manager needs to be communicating with somebody other than me, my job is to help them learn how to do that themselves, not to do it for them. And I think there's definitely times like safety, or I think that's part of our skill set, is to know the difference between this is going to be therapeutic or this is going to be helpful for the situation, or I'm enabling a communication barrier that is already there. And how can I encourage this person to feel like they made a change in how they handle conflict, or they made a change in took a risk in communication that at the end of the day is going to help them grow as an organization.
I think a very telling question that you can ask a manager is, what is your biggest fear in this situation that you called me in on? And if they answer that question truthfully, you start getting at what's really going on, because it's fear-driven.
Whitney, I think what you just said is really important, really important. If you can consult with them and help them learn how to handle this situation, help them gain a new skill set, or walk through, even role play with them. You know, how are we going to play this out? We spend a lot of time with just our peer coordinators saying, you know what, if they need to go somewhere else, coach them through that process. Don't do it.
Yeah.
It's safer on everybody's part.
It is. It's safer from a risk management perspective, and it goes back to my awesome metaphor of don't tie their shoe for them. If that's part of the problem, and you know that from your role, encourage and help and just push if you need to, nudge to have them do that themselves.
And if they choose not to, because the risk of doing the right thing for the organization is too great for them, you have to let it go. You can't then say, oh, this is terrible because now the organization is not going to change or get better or grow or...
But where do you work on that situation? When you let it go, do you continue working with them, or do you let it go? Do you want to say, here's what I see, and they say, well, I don't want to deal with that. Do you say, well, okay, what do you want me to do? Or do you say, well, then maybe your group's not ready for this, or maybe you're not ready for this? Kind of like starting with the client is.
Yeah.
If they're not ready, if the client's not ready to get help, what's our role?
Well, I'd be interested to know how others would respond to that, but we sort of see it as a change management process, and if you're ambivalent or whatever, that's perfectly fine, you know? And how about if we touch base again in a month, or 2 weeks or something? No, I don't think you feel good about just, okay, then if you're not gonna do the right thing, then see ya.
Yeah, we don't just want to shut that door,
No.
but we back up, give it time, allow that process to naturally occur in that person, and that's a great spot to add in the personal EAP, right?
But they-
Because I'm not going to be your therapist, but
But then
somebody
you
else
kind of
could.
like the client, you may have to suffer a little bit more pain before they come back and say, I need help.
But it's their choice to suffer.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you may put it back on them.
And
Don't try to fix
sometimes
it.
that pain is what needs to happen in order for a person to move to a place of action. That's an important conversation, I think, to keep having. But in the interest of our time today, let's move on. I went ahead and switched the slide on you, surprise. This is not the model for management consultation. I want to make that abundantly clear. This is what management consultation looks like in my brain. So this is as simple as I could kind of boil it down, because I like to start from that place of simplicity. But just of those 4 steps, and if we can keep ourselves on track with moving generally in that order. Okay, so assessing the need is a lot of that question asking, fact gathering, and looking at relevant history, relevant being the operative word there. This is a spot where we may need to really redirect the manager, do that broken record thing, back to, okay, that is some history, but what's really relevant to our solution, to where we want to get today. If you're just kind of calling to vent about this, we can do that to a point, but when does it become kind of irrelevant? What's been tried? What was the outcome? What didn't work? Moving on to crafting a solution with the manager, not for the manager. Identify these buckets, another one of my words, but I like to, it's compartmentalizing, right? What tools do we have, do you have, do I have, do we have as your EAP that we can put this problem into? There might be more than one, in fact there usually is. But what might those be? A referral into the EAP, we call it a soft referral. Really encourage this person, give them my direct number, I can help get them set up with an EAP counselor. A mandatory referral into EAP, where we would kind of go that route. Fitness for duty evaluation, which is one of the tools on our handout. A SAP evaluation, SAP eval, if the person's under DOT regs, that's also something we need to know about. Reasonable suspicion testing. So we're really trying to match what we're hearing with the potential tools or solutions. A performance improvement plan or a last chance agreement, termination, there's an option. Training, staff training, executive coaching, manager training, mediation or conflict resolution, HR consult. Other ideas about buckets or places that we can kind of put this, because that's what the manager's really asking for. So what do I do with this? How do I solve this?
I don't know if you said this, but coaching for that manager.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And that could happen, we could identify that an entire executive team could benefit from that, or just an individual. Okay. Other ideas of tools that could be brought in? I got them all. Thanks. So then just establishing the plan. I'd really like to think about this as making an informal or formalized contract with the manager, whatever works best for the situation and for the manager's personality. But okay, so this is what I'm hearing. This is what it sounds like. You're nodding your head to. What do you think about this? What order do you want these steps to go in? What's your next step? Who's responsible for part B of this, and when's it going to happen? So and that's us moving them more towards that action part too. Really a lot easier to take action on a tough spot when we have a plan, and when we feel like we have somebody backing us up, you know, who isn't taking the side. And then the follow-up process, so whatever that timeline looks like, and however involved or uninvolved the EAP is in executing the plan, let's follow up. How are we gonna know if this worked? What's gonna be different? How much and in what way is the workplace gonna feel safer? Physically, emotionally. Make sure that you don't miss that check-in, because again, that's you valuing the EAP as a management tool. If we skip that follow-up and skip that check-in, and I hope it works out, that doesn't look good. Ask for feedback, evaluate ourselves, be willing to learn through this process about our client companies, about ourselves as consultants, about workplace law, policy, all of that stuff, because we can't know all of it. So, does anybody have additions? I'm just interested to this model. Anything, any other place where you might add another step or rework it?
Is assessing the need the same as defining the problem?
Yeah, I think it can be. I mean, the problem probably is going to come first, even before assessing the need, but you know, that's going to be the my hair is on fire phone call. This is the problem. But assessing the need is going to let us understand the problem more fully, yeah? Okay. So maybe keeping this model in mind, or however you naturally go through this process in your day-to-day, let's look at a couple of examples. And maybe just get with your tables. We'll give it a couple of minutes. But think through, let's take a look at this first one, and let's think at those first two levels. Assessing need, Randy?
I was just going to say assessing risk would be one that I would add to that.
Great.
If there's a need. I mean,
okay.
there may not be any need for that. But.
So the risk assessment, yeah, that's a good thing to have up there right in that first spot. Thank you.
Who's involved?
Who's involved?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So gathering just those details. Who are the key players? Mm-hmm. Just really setting up a space where you can really see this thing as clearly as possible. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's take a look. Keeping those first two spots in mind with the risk assessment, identification, all of that. And, okay, along the lines with something that's already come up. A shooting occurs at a public school, just miles from your client company's office. HR director calls you, is really, really upset. A few employees were directly affected. What should I do? How's that for an open-ended question?
Internal or external?
I don't know. Let's get together in our tables and see. Just my question for you all is, what do you do? What questions do you ask? So let's get together, throw some questions out there, and just kind of get a conceptualization of where you would go with this for maybe 3-4 minutes. CISD. Can we start over here with your group, Patrick?
Well, we got past the first part of number 1 is all we got to.
That's okay. That's okay.
Finding out who was directly impacted. How is the person on the phone doing? How are they coping? What's their state? What's their need? Assessing the current situation. So is there a homicide investigation? Specifics about the situation with those folks. I can't read anything. Understanding like the lockdown procedure in that school, and kind of just there's a lot of logistics in this particular case that are really going to impact what happens, and then kind of just drilling down into who's doing what. What would be the possibility if they wanted some kind of intervention? How would they get organized? So I think a lot of logistics up front. This is really
specific.
important.
And that immediate, how's the person on the phone doing? Immediate calming so that they can do their job, and letting them know that you'll be able to feel this, and there's a way that you can feel this and do your job. Okay.
That's just the first. That's
first idea.
As far as we got.
Sure.
will you be my contact person throughout this?
Okay.
Is the school still in lockdown? Is it safe for people to come on scene?
Mm-hmm.
Has anyone been killed? What's the status of the, it says a tragic shooting? You know, how many people have been killed? Have they been identified? Has family been, I mean, it's just all kinds of things you gotta ask for, you can set a foot on.
Okay, so we're really information gathering, yeah. Sounds like we are coming online as the prefrontal cortex here. When it's really hard for this individual to be thinking rationally and for anybody in that building to be thinking rationally. And we may be feeling some stuff going on ourselves. So it's another place to be aware of, okay, am I the right person for this consult? Other ideas from this table?
We just have briefly around, you know, what type of workplace is this? Are they knowing that your employees will not be working at the highest level? You know, what are some latitude that can be provided? What information do they need?
Okay. Okay. Back to our middle table here. Anything else?
Along those lines, you know, what communication has been sent out already to staff? Have staff been told that they can go home or not? Or what's the policy on that?
Okay.
And, you know, down the road, setting up maybe critical incident debrief.
So thinking ahead to the future of what's going to be needed tomorrow, 4 days from now, 3 months from now.
Or today.
Or today. Absolutely. Would it be helpful to have somebody on site with you today?
Right.
What has been your communication? Really getting them out of this moment of paralysis. What do I do? Yeah. And back, at the back table, anything we haven't touched on?
Well, so we felt we needed to understand what directly affected, how they've been affected, and that would drive a lot of where we might go
Okay.
with it. If there was parents, then we need to find out, you know, what resources parents have and communicate that with the HR.
Okay.
If there were other ways they were affected, were they vicarious trauma versus layered all through that?
Yes. Good.
Deal with that.
So that's exactly right, where if we are asking the right questions right up front, that's really going to take our consultation and our solution finding in some different ways. Somebody might be experiencing secondary trauma and somebody else might have a child at this school today. Okay. Okay.
I know this is obvious, but sometimes people just don't even think about reminding their employees that they have an EAP. They just don't. So just that simple thing, if you accomplish nothing else.
Yep.
Yeah.
Remember, if you're going to not if, but when you communicate with your employees about this, remember to include our number. We're here.
I think a statement after you've gotten all your information is, this is what we've typically done in situations like this, and go into having somebody on site immediately, having somebody following up, having somebody available for the teachers, having somebody available for students, all of those realms of CISD.
Okay.
And then keep that, when I asked the question about who's going to be in charge here, is to keep that person in the role of the leader. If it's the HR person who's going to be doing it, the principal, keep that person in the role and tell them, here's what you need to do if you're going to call this large meeting and explain to everybody what's happened, and then introduce us as the people here who are to help. So we get real clarification of roles, and you maintain your leadership role. We're just an assistance to your leadership role.
Okay. Okay. So clarifying, bringing things back to a black or white type of place.
I don't know how many of you experience this, but I'd say at least half the time when we get calls like this, the employees are doing fine. So I would add to that. Don't assume that you need to do anything other than remind employees that you're there.
Okay.
People are just
So having that emotional boundary of maybe not buying into this one person's reaction. Okay. Patrick, do you have
I think we all overlooked the obvious, maybe because it's obvious, but I think right up front, we're going to want to express some empathy with this person who's calling about the situation.
They're freaking out.
Right. And then we tell them to call Randy. Randy's phone number. Right after.
Okay. I'll do that on my Okay.
We all have, most of our companies have violence in the workplace, not only a policy, but some kind of a committee, for an assessment committee. And we tend so much of tragedies like with the schools and stuff that I wonder if we think about what does our company do if there is a situation, like if there's an incident at a school, what do we allow as far as our employees? And we talked about if it's a company where employees are not allowed to use their cell phones, do you allow them to use their cell phones at that time? Do you allow TVs to be on? What about releasing the parents if there's a situation? So I think that committee, that assessment committee, could work on something like that. If there's a situation outside of our company, but that impacts the employees of that company, what are the things that we're going to allow them to do?
Okay, so this could even be part of this follow-up process. If this is the first time that this manager or this company has been impacted in this way, a follow-up, you know, when we're back in a relatively safe space could be, what does this mean for your future policy? Would it, I've seen companies organize a group around this to make this happen. What does that look like? And maybe in that moment, for the manager, reminding them of what has your company, how's your organization reacted in situations that felt like this before. Let's go on and do maybe one more in a very different vein. A supervisor called to report one of her part-time employees is really depressed. She knows this because that employee texted a coworker last night saying that she was going to kill herself, and then that employee called in sick today. So the supervisor tells you, I'm on my way to the employee's house, we're going to do an intervention, I'm going to take care of this. I just want to let you know, I'm going to make this employee call you this afternoon to do counseling. Go. Oh my gosh.
Back to the earlier slide and realized we can't do that, so we said we would invite them to reconsider their decision to continue driving to the person's home, and pulling over might be a part of that immediately. So basically just slowing down, trying to slow down the situation. We want to check into their reactions, and then importantly talked about reassuring them that, you know, that there can be a plan, there can be help available for this person, but then again inviting them to look at their boundaries, their role, and the risks, and the risks involved. So boundaries, risk, and role.
Okay,
As far as we
boundaries,
go.
risk, and role. So really putting the brakes on, maybe literally and figuratively in this case. Kate, do you want to be your own spokesperson?
Sure.
You wanna chat?
Sorry, I was putting this out so hopefully I don't overlap. Did you talk about doing a welfare check? Perhaps having, instead of her going, you could have her stop what she's doing and perhaps calling police to do a welfare check instead of her.
That's one of those buckets that we actually didn't mention, right? In a safety issue, we can coach somebody through doing a welfare check, or we can offer to do it for them if they want to give us that information. Okay. Over on my right.
What were we talking? I don't know if this, so we've got this information and to not do anything. So as to coach the supervisor, and especially if you've got a normal person that's sick, you call them anyways just to kind of check in and see what's going on. I mean, in this case, you know, possibly calling them and saying, you know, this is what we heard, I'm concerned, are you okay? I don't know if that's crossing.
Don't know if that's happened.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a great question to ask. What have you already done?
Yeah.
Or is this the knee-jerk reaction because you heard about this text?
Right. I mean, to have that information and not do anything.
Right. Yeah, they have to do something.
Yeah.
And at least they know that. Right? And that's another place where this is a situation where, as a consultant, we do draw this more hard line. Something needs to happen here. Is this it? Maybe, maybe not.
So we thought that stopping the supervisor was a really good idea also. And then backing up to the coworker and have the supervisor, have the coworker that got the text call us so we could make an assessment on, was this something that does need to be reacted to, or is there this inappropriate reaction to the text? And then maybe loop the supervisor out of it because you're already on, you're creating problems rather than resolving.
Yeah. This is a situation where it's really easy as a consultant to have an opinion. And if she chooses to go ahead with her plan, what then?
Could be bad.
It could be.
Well, I think it bring up, you may, the possibility of you may find a coworker that you want to do that.
Is that how you want this to go?
Well, and who else is involved? So if they're in HR, if there are no risk at the organization, who else has been notified of this? What has happened so far? Who needs to be involved in the decision?
Right.
One thought I just had too is you could ask if she has emergency contact.
Mm.
I mean, that would be a much lower level thing. Maybe she
Right.
has a husband.
Have
that
you
she
checked
lives
in with
and-
HR and this person's personnel file for their emergency contact? Okay. And if she's really dedicated to this plan, nope, keeping my foot on the gas. Okay, so what are your steps here? Are you gonna knock on the door? What are you gonna do if nobody answers? Maybe I can stay on the phone with you, or can we have the police meet you there? Something like that.
That's much better.
Seems like it, yeah.
Yeah, preferable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, we were saying at the break, you can't write this stuff, you can't make this stuff up, and I didn't make this up.
And the last sentence, it would be tempting to say, when the supervisor says, heads up, we'll be sending, it'd be tempting to say, are you out of your mind? But you wouldn't want to do that, but then might not, maybe just to encourage that person not to make decisions beyond the moment.
Great.
But, you know,
When I think about a lot of the companies we work with, consultants that are very, very small, family run, they probably know too much of everyone's business.
Mm-hmm.
And so they think they're really helping, so it's, you get that
Small
different-
business, that
Yeah,
family
that-
feel, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And that last sentence too is one where it's like, hold off. Let's not make any decisions. I think that's definitely an option. But I don't even know if this person actually has a work performance issue. They may have been performing just fine up until this, and this is not a work issue, except that it crossed that boundary because of technology. Yay. So we are out of time. I have another example here, but this is just a great conversation, and thanks for letting me facilitate today. And options for learning more about this. The Los Angeles EAPA chapter has a fantastic knowledge base on their website around this area.
Jeffrey Harris.
That's the gentleman who also writes the column in the EAPA journal, who if you're a member of EAPA, you get that in your inbox every month and in your mailbox.
Are you gonna email this out or post it on the website?
It'll be on the chapter website, and I'm happy to email slides also, okay? Wow, thanks everybody.
Couple things, the consultants calling, but